I'm Franklin Hayes, 68. My son stormed into my kitchen one night, demanded $32,000, and warned me I'd regret it when I refused. If you were in my shoes at 68, would you have given in? I'd honestly like to know. That Friday had started like any other in Springfield, Ohio, quiet, overcast, the kind of day that made coffee taste better and old bones ache less. I'd been over at my son's house earlier for dinner, helping Marissa move a few things into the basement, and was just settling back into my own house when the phone rang. But that wasn't the moment everything turned. That came later when the door to my kitchen slammed open so hard it cracked against the wall and shook the coffee mug in my hand. Derek stood there, shoulders hunched in that old leather jacket he refused to let go of, eyes, bloodshot hair stuck to his forehead. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Dad," he gasped, not even shutting the door behind him. "I need money. 32,000. Tonight." I set the mug down slowly next to a pile of mail, utility bills, pharmacy flyers, a tax notice I'd been meaning to ignore. That amount, 32,000, wasn't just a number. It was the entire balance I'd set aside after selling the family farm money that was supposed to last me through retirement. 3 generations of Hayes men had worked that land until their backs gave out. I was the last one to ride a tractor across those fields. That money wasn't just cash, it was legacy. Derek didn't sit. He couldn't. He paced back and forth like an animal in a 2 small cage boots, clicking hard against my worn hardwood floors. "It's complicated," he said finally. "A deal fell apart. I just need to fix it fast." Complicated like the horses in 2023, or like poker in 22. I kept my voice steady, but my jaw tightened. Derek's eyes snapped up to meet mine. He wasn't prepared to be reminded of past screw-ups. "It's different this time." "How much do you owe them?" I asked. His silence gave me the answer. "Whoever sent you here," I said. "They're not the type to offer payment plans, are they?" He ran a hand through his hair, greasy, unwashed, then looked around like he expected someone to barge in after him. "I'm begging you. You don't understand." I stood there for a moment, really looking at him, the stubble on his jaw, the trembling in his hands, the faint smell of liquor, or maybe stale desperation. "No," I said, calm, clear, firm, "not this time." "What do you mean, not this time?" he snapped. "I'm your son." "Exactly why I'm saying no." He stepped forward, looming, blocking the doorway. "You've got the money. You sold the farm. I need it more than you do." "That money isn't for you," I replied, stepping around him to the sink. "It's what's keeping me afloat. It's the only thing I have left from a lifetime of work. You've lost enough of my money already." "You're enabling," he barked. "You're enabling me, by helping your own blood." "I call it protecting what I've worked for," I said, turning back to face him. "You're 38. When are you going to stop using your father as a safety net?" The pause that followed was heavy, and then it came the shift in his eyes. Something cold took over his face, something I hadn't seen since he was a teenager getting suspended for lying about vandalizing a teacher's car. "You'll regret this, old man." His voice was low, controlled, but soaked with menace. Then he turned and stormed out. The screen door slammed so hard behind him I heard the frame rattle. From my kitchen window I watched him stomp to his battered pickup and rev the engine so loud the windows shook. The red taillights blinked as he tore down the gravel road. And just like that, the house fell silent. Only it wasn't peace. It was pressure. A silence thick enough to squeeze your chest. I stayed out of the kitchen the rest of the weekend like the room had been cursed. I filled my time with yard work, replacing loose boards in the fence, pulling weeds that hadn't really grown yet, checking locks more than I needed to. Every time I passed the kitchen, I could still hear his voice. "You'll regret this, old man." I'd heard a lot from Derek over the years. But that night felt different. Back in 2021, things had been quieter. Not peaceful, but quieter. I'd just turned 64 and was still adjusting to a world where I didn't wake at 5 to check on cows. Selling the farm the year before had felt like cutting off a limb, but it had been time. My knees said so. My back screamed it. Derek had helped me close it out, or at least he was there for the paperwork. He wasn't much for early mornings or heavy lifting. At the time, I still believed naively that the money from the sale might give him a second chance. He was still working construction off and on, still calling it temporary even after a decade, still spending more time at bars than job sites. But when he showed up with Marissa smiling, polite, steady, I wanted to believe she was a sign he was maturing. She was 10 years younger, worked as a veterinary tech, and had a patience Derek didn't deserve. When they told me they were getting married, I bit my tongue, smiled, and offered to help with the reception. Looking back, that was the first mistake. They moved into a rental house 3 blocks from mine. Small yard peeling paint, but affordable. Derek promised he'd fix it up. He never did. Instead, I'd catch glimpses of Marissa mowing the lawn alone, hauling trash to the curb while Derek sat out back with a beer and Bluetooth speaker blasting some old rock anthem. I tried not to judge. Lord knows I'd made my share of parenting mistakes. But small things kept piling up. One afternoon, I offered to pay for a new water heater. She'd mentioned the cold showers once quietly, like she was afraid to be ungrateful. Derek insisted I give him the cash and he'd take care of it. That water heater never showed up. Another time, Marissa brought over a letter, an overdraft notice from a joint account. Her name was on it, but she hadn't known about the charges. He said it was just a timing issue, she whispered, embarrassed, that the bank made a mistake. But banks don't accidentally process 6 cash withdrawals in 1 week. I started keeping a folder, not because I wanted to build a case, just because I knew how Derek worked. He twisted facts until you couldn't find the original shape. I needed a paper trail if things went sideways. Inside that folder, a copy of the check I'd written for the wedding deposit, $6,000 even. Screenshots Marissa sent of Venmo requests Derek made at 3 a.m. for emergencies. The overdraft notice. A photo I'd taken of a pawn slip I found in his truck for tools I'd bought him last Christmas. Still, I kept telling myself, maybe it'll settle. Maybe Marissa will ground him. But then came the insurance thing. Marissa was in a car accident. Nothing serious, just a fender bender. She called me crying, not because of the damage, but because the policy Derek swore he'd paid for had lapsed. No coverage. I offered to help again. Not with cash, but I contacted a friend who ran a local agency and got her set up with basic liability. Paid for the first 3 months. Quietly. That night, Derek showed up drunk on my porch. "You go behind my back again, we'll have a problem," he slurred. "You already have a problem," I said, holding the storm door closed between us. He didn't like that, threw his beer can into my yard and staggered off. And still, I didn't cut him off. Not until he brought up the farm. It was a Sunday dinner. Roast chicken. Marissa had brought a pie. Derek was 2 beers in. "You know, if you really cared," he muttered loud enough for both of us to hear, "you'd have given me a share. I'm your only kid." "You didn't want to work it," I replied. "You made that choice." Still mine by blood. Marissa stiffened beside him. I watched her glance at me, silently pleading for me to let it go. But I couldn't. Not anymore. "That farm was my sweat and your grandfather's before me," I said. "You didn't earn a piece. You just waited for it to fall." He stood up, dinner unfinished. "Maybe I should have waited longer," he said. He didn't come by for the next few weeks. Marissa called now and then. Once she dropped off cookies and told me she was sorry. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. By the end of 2021, I stopped pretending. I knew who Derek was. I just hadn't accepted it. I turned 65 in the spring of 2022. It should have been a milestone retirement. Medicare, those quiet fishing trips I'd always said I'd take once the farm sold. But instead, I was budgeting to cover someone else's damage. Marissa came over one Saturday morning, pale and quiet. She sat at my kitchen table, hands folded, barely able to meet my eyes. "I'm pregnant," she said. I looked at her for a long moment. Her voice didn't carry the joy you'd expect from someone sharing that kind of news. I nodded. "Yours to decide, of course. You okay?" She hesitated. "I think so." She never once said Derek's name. That silence told me everything. From that day, something in me shifted. I started preparing, not for a fight, but for a line I'd have to draw. I made changes quietly. I rewrote my will. I moved the proceeds from the farm sale, over $320,000, into a trust earmarked for education, health, or housing needs for any future grandchildren. I named Marissa as trustee. Derek wasn't mentioned. I left a letter with my lawyer, explaining why. Not out of malice, but because I'd watched too many second chances dissolve into lost rent and empty bottles. Derek didn't notice. He was too busy planning his comeback. He'd taken up crypto trading or so, he said. Bragged about it at cookouts, told neighbors he was flipping coins into condos. But behind the scenes, it was just more withdrawals. He called me one night in July, furious. "You froze the account." "No," I said calmly. "I moved the money. My money. Yours is whatever you earn." "You're screwing over your own blood," he snapped. "You'd rather give it to her kid than to me." "That child didn't ask to be here," I replied. "But he'll need a future, and you've proven you can't build one." He hung up. A week later, I got a letter in the mail stamped from some online legal service. Derek had tried to contest the trust structure, claiming I was mentally unfit when I signed it. It was laughable. My lawyer shut it down in a paragraph, but I kept the letter. I added it to the folder. Then came the phone call. Marissa sobbing. Derek had pushed her. Nothing broken, thank God, but it had shaken her. She'd left and was staying with a friend. "Do you need anything?" I asked. "No," she whispered. I wanted someone to know, in case he twists it." That night I called my lawyer again. We added a protective clause to the trust. If Derek had any history of violence or legal action tied to abuse, he'd be permanently excluded from accessing anything tied to it. A month later, Marissa filed a restraining order, quietly, without drama. Derek retaliated by slandering her on social media, claiming she faked the pregnancy to get access to family money. She didn't respond, neither did I. But in my folder I added screenshots. Fall came. The leaves in Springfield turned rust and gold. I began to see less of Marissa. She was working more hours, staying out of sight. Derek had moved back in with an old buddy across town. By Thanksgiving, I knew I couldn't keep tiptoeing around this. That night I hosted dinner. Just me, Marissa, and one empty chair. I carved the turkey and watched her pick at the stuffing. "You still want him at the birth?" I asked gently. She shook her head. "Not anymore." We sat in silence for a while. "I want to raise him different," she said finally. "Not entitled, not bitter." "You will," I said, "because you already are." I gave her a copy of the trust paperwork that night, told her to put it somewhere safe. She held it like it was something fragile. "Why me?" she asked. "Because I see how you try," I said. "Because you never once asked for it. And because my son made his choices." When she left, I sat on the porch a long while, listening to the wind move through the bare trees. It wasn't anger I felt, it was grief. Not just for what I'd lost, but for what Derek never became. The morning Marissa went into labor, Derek was asleep on a borrowed couch 3 miles away. I knew because he texted me at noon. "Is it happening yet?" I didn't reply. Marissa didn't want him there, and I respected that. At the hospital, she gripped my hand through contractions. Her voice was calm but sharp when the nurse asked any father coming. "No," she said, "just my father-in-law." I'll never forget that. When the baby arrived, a boy 7 pounds even, she let me hold him first. He opened his eyes for barely a second, just a flicker. But in that flicker I saw everything I wanted to protect. We named him Matthew. Derek found out through a cousin's Facebook post. He called me that evening, his voice a mix of bitterness and wounded pride. "You named him without me." "I didn't name him," I replied. "His mother did." He scoffed. "You really think this trust stunt makes you a better dad?" I said nothing. He continued, "I'll fight for custody. Just watch." But he didn't. Not really. A half-baked petition arrived in April, filled with contradictions and no legal merit. He never showed up to the mediation hearing. My lawyer said quietly afterward, "He's burning daylight and reputation." Meanwhile, I helped Marissa move into a rental duplex closer to the grocery store where she worked part-time. I paid the security deposit, $800, and helped her set up baby gates, but the rest she handled herself. She never asked for more than she needed. That spring, I made a final adjustment to the trust. If Matthew enrolled in any post-secondary education, including trade school, the trust would match tuition dollar for dollar up to $120,000. Marissa cried when I showed her. "That's too much," she whispered. "No," I said. "That's the bare minimum for someone trying to build something." That same month, Derek posted a TikTok claiming his toxic family cut him out for being too real. It got a few thousand views, then fizzled. But a screenshot made its way to me. Someone tagged Matthew's birth announcement photo with it. I printed that too, added it to the folder. July brought heat and tension. Derek showed up uninvited to the duplex, once drunk, shouting on the sidewalk. I called the police. They escorted him off without charges, but I filed a no trespass order the next day. Marissa installed a Ring camera. By fall, he stopped trying, at least visibly. But something told me it wasn't over. In September, I got a letter again from one of those online legal services. This time, it was a petition to mediate family trust conflict, filed in his name. He wanted 50% of all funds allocated to future grandchildren, citing genetic entitlement. My lawyer's response was surgical. The trust was irrevocable. Matthew had a restraining order against Derek as part of a household protection clause. The trust language was bulletproof. Still, Derek escalated. He began contacting old family friends, spinning stories. Dad's senile Marissa manipulated him. That baby isn't even mine. One evening, my neighbor Tom pulled me aside. Just so you know, Derek cornered me outside the hardware store, he said. Tried to get me to sign something saying you weren't in your right mind when you sold the farm. I thanked him. Then I went home, poured a glass of iced tea, and sat at my desk. I opened the folder. Inside it now sat the original trust agreement, the addendum excluding Derek, the birth certificate listing Matthew, screenshots of social media slander, police call logs, the no trespass order, copies of Derek's legal filings, 3 witness statements. It was almost 2 inches thick. Every page a quiet defense, not of my legacy, but of Marissa's stability. In early October, I sent Derek one last letter through my lawyer. If you file one more fraudulent petition, we will pursue full legal sanctions for harassment. I never heard back. Halloween came and went. Marissa dressed Matthew as a pumpkin. I sat on the porch handing out candy. We didn't talk about Derek that night. We just existed quiet, steady, without drama. And it was enough. But I knew what was coming next. The next petition wouldn't be about trust funds. It would be about something worse. Orchestrated a reputational attack on Derek, resulting in emotional distress, lost income, and reputational damage. He wanted a public apology and $60,000 in damages. I laughed once. Then I picked up the folder. I laid it open on the kitchen table like a ledger from an old life. Tab 1, his own social media posts, calling me senile, accusing Marissa of sleeping her way into inheritance, mocking Matthew's paternity. Tab 2, court filings with contradictions, typos, no legal standing. Tab 3, Marissa's sworn statement, police logs, and 3 neighbor affidavits. Tab 4, the trust documents, legal, notarized, bulletproof. I took photos of each section. Then I called my lawyer. Do I respond? She paused, then said, only if you're ready to make this public. I didn't reply right away. That night I looked through the folder again, page by page. Not in anger, just clarity. This wasn't about a fight anymore. It was about anchoring the truth. The next day I called Marissa. Do you want to handle this privately? I asked. She was quiet, then said he came by my work yesterday. My stomach dropped. He didn't come in. Just stood by the parking lot, she said. Didn't say anything, just stared. That was enough. I called the police, added the incident to the no contact order. Then I made a decision. December 22nd, I walked into the local courthouse and filed a motion. The title was simple. Petition to permanently restrict contact under grandchild welfare exception. The basis: harassment, defamation, attempted manipulation of legal guardianship, and potential psychological risk to a minor. My lawyer attached over 90 pages from the folder. Every screenshot, every document, every record. It wasn't about revenge. It was documentation. Quiet, clinical, irrefutable. Christmas came. We didn't decorate much. Just a string of lights on the porch and a pine-scented candle in the hallway. Marissa brought Matthew over. He was just learning to crawl, dragging one chubby leg behind the other like a determined explorer. He babbled something that sounded like Dada. Marissa looked at me, unsure. I shook my head. He's just experimenting with sound. But deep down I felt something stir. Not ownership, not replacement. Just love. That evening we sat by the fireplace, lights off, just the glow from the embers. Marissa asked quietly, if the court grants it, what happens to him? I knew what she meant, Derek. If he stops, nothing, I said. But if he doesn't, this becomes the wall. She nodded, then said something I didn't expect. I'm changing Matthew's last name. I want him to have mine. I didn't argue. She had earned the right to protect her son in any way she chose. On January 3rd, the court accepted the filing. The hearing date was set for February 1st. Derek didn't respond until January 29th. 3 days before the hearing, he posted a video. Here's the truth they're hiding, he said to the camera, holding up what looked like a childhood photo of himself. My own father disowned me because I stood up for myself. The comment section exploded. Half believed him, half didn't. But it didn't matter, because I had the folder. The morning of the hearing, it snowed. I wore a charcoal suit and carried the folder in a weatherproof case. Marissa sat beside me in a navy coat, holding a photo of Matthew in her lap. Derek arrived late, alone, no lawyer. When the judge asked if he had legal representation, he shrugged. They all want retainers. The judge frowned. Do you understand the seriousness of today's motion? I do now, Derek muttered it. My lawyer presented the folder indexed and tabbed. The judge flipped through it slowly, page by page. Occasionally, he stopped highlighting something or reading a quote aloud. He paused at the affidavit from Tom, my neighbor. Then he looked at Marissa. You're the mother. Yes, Your Honor. You've had sole custody since birth. Yes. And you confirm that the child's father has made no consistent effort toward care or support. I do. The judge turned to Derek. Anything you'd like to submit? Derek held up a crumpled envelope. Just a letter from my counselor. The judge skimmed it, then handed it back without comment. After a recess, he returned and read his decision aloud. Based on the evidence presented, I am granting the petition to permanently restrict contact between Mr. Derek Hollis and both the petitioner and minor child effective immediately. Any future attempt to circumvent this order will be treated as contempt. He paused. Then added, Mr. Hollis, you are not a victim of exclusion. You are the architect of your own distance. Outside, Marissa didn't speak. She just exhaled deeply and stared at the snow. I handed her the folder. It's yours now, I said. She looked confused. Don't you want to keep it? I shook my head. No. That chapter's closed, but if he ever tries again, you'll have everything. The order arrived in the mail exactly 1 week after the hearing. It was clean, precise. Signed, sealed, and certified by the clerk of court. From that moment on, Derek was legally restricted from contacting me, Marissa, or Matthew. No more letters, no more surprise visits, no more videos. He had faded, at least on paper. But it didn't mean peace arrived overnight. Marissa stayed couches. Do you think he'll try something else? She asked one evening, as we walked around the block pushing Matthew in his stroller. I think he might rant, I said. But if he acts, we have the law. She nodded, but her grip on the stroller tightened. That night, after Matthew had gone to bed, she sat across from me in the kitchen with a form in her hand. I want to change our last name, she said. To what I asked. Mine and Matthew's. No hyphen, just Bennett. I paused. You sure? I don't want my son tied to that name. I don't want people Googling it and landing on his nonsense. I didn't need convincing. So we filled out the paperwork together. We paid the fee. We scheduled the hearing. And 30 days later, we sat in a different courthouse. A smaller one, less formal. When the judge asked why, Marissa stood up straight and said, because my son deserves a clean slate. The judge approved it on the spot. Just like that, Matthew Hollis became Matthew Bennett. With the name change, something shifted in Marissa. She stood taller, smiled more. Even started talking about work again. I'm thinking of applying for that internal promotion, she said over breakfast one morning in March. The one in Dayton. Yeah, same pay but a better schedule. I'd be home earlier for Matthew. Do it, I told her. You've earned that. Meanwhile, I started sorting through the things I had put off. There were boxes in the attic I hadn't opened in over a decade, photos of Ellen, her recipe cards, our mortgage records, her father's old war medals. Some things I donated, some I scanned. But one envelope I sealed back up. It was Ellen's final letter. She'd written it after the diagnosis before the surgery. I had read it only once. But now I placed it in a fireproof box next to a copy of the new court order. One afternoon, Marissa brought home a binder. On the front, she had written family plan. Inside a monthly budget, a schedule for shared babysitting, a folder for medical records. I flipped through it, smiling. You made this. I had to. I can't keep running on panic and instinct, she laughed. I need order. Matthew giggled from the playmat, kicking wildly. He had just started standing on his own. Every day he wobbled a little less. Just like us. Spring came early that year. The trees budded in March, and the neighborhood was alive again. Lawnmowers, humming kids, riding bikes, dogs barking at squirrels. I started taking Matthew on morning walks. At first in the stroller, then later holding just one of his fingers as he teetered beside me. Sometimes neighbors waved. One woman, Julia, who lived down the street, stopped us one morning. He looks like you, she said warmly. I smiled, but corrected her gently. I'm the grandfather, by love, not blood. Well, she said, he chose to walk beside you. That counts. Later that week, Marissa came home from work and dropped a key on the table. I added you to the emergency contacts, she said, and to the school pickup list, just in case. I looked at the key. It wasn't just metal. It was trust. Thank you, I said. Derek, as expected, didn't go quietly. He posted another video, this one framed like a documentary, complete with ominous music. He claimed he'd been legally erased by a vindictive ex and her elderly enabler. He never used our names. But the subtext was clear. He uploaded it to 3 platforms. It got shared, mocked, dissected. Some believed him, but most didn't. And more importantly, legally, it didn't matter. He was banned from contacting us. And the moment he even hinted at Matthew, our lawyer sent a cease and desist. We never heard from him again. One Sunday afternoon, we hosted a barbecue. It was modest, just 3 neighbors, 1 toddler pool, and a dozen grilled hot dogs. Marisa made lemonade. Matthew wore a hat with dinosaur spikes. It was nothing fancy, but it was ours. And when one of the guests asked about Matthew's dad, Marissa didn't flinch. She just said, it's just the 3 of us. No apology, no backstory, just truth. That night, after everyone left and the yard was quiet, I sat alone on the porch. Matthew was asleep. Marissa was folding towels. And for the first time in over a year, the air didn't feel like it was bracing for a storm. It just settled. I closed my eyes and whispered to the night, he has her name now, and she has her voice. I waited until spring before opening the letter again. Ellen's handwriting had faded slightly, but her curves and slants still spoke in her voice. She had sealed it in an envelope marked, for when it's quiet again. And now, for the first time in years, the house was finally quiet. Matthew was at daycare. Marissa was at work. The wind barely touched the porch. I unsealed it slowly. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and hopefully so is the chaos. I paused. My hands trembled. I know you'll try to fix things for Marissa. That's who you are. But promise me something, don't disappear into her life so far that you stop living your own. It hit me harder than I expected. Because truthfully, I hadn't thought much about my life since Ellen died. I had moved through the days like a lighthouse keeper, steady, solitary, always scanning for the next wave. If Marissa ever finds herself in trouble, don't just protect her, help her build. She's stronger than she thinks, but you're the only one who ever saw that in her clearly. Show her. I thought about the binder she'd built, the way she navigated the courthouse, the name change. She had built. She was still building. I just held the ladder. Also, please don't let Matthew grow up thinking silence equals safety. We were too quiet with our own hurts. I want him to know he can speak and still be loved. Ellen had always known what silence cost. She saw it in her mother's bruises, in her father's drinking, in the way people in town never asked questions. She had spent her whole life trying to break that cycle. And now, in her absence, she had handed me that responsibility. That evening, I tucked the letter back in its envelope. I didn't lock it away this time. I placed it in the living room drawer beneath the family binder where Marissa could find it someday. When she was ready. Life didn't return to some perfect rhythm after that. There were still days when Matthew threw tantrums for no reason. Still moments when Marissa snapped out of sheer exhaustion. But those things felt normal. Like the chaos of living, not the kind that destroyed. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Marissa asked, "Do you think Mom would be proud of me?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I handed her a folded piece of paper, the letter. She looked at me puzzled. Read it when you're alone, I said. That night I heard her crying behind her bedroom door. The next morning she hugged me without saying a word, and then poured 2 mugs of coffee like we'd done that every morning for a decade. Around that same time I started volunteering at the library. Just a few hours a week helping with the kids' reading program. They needed someone who didn't mind chaos and could tell a decent story. I had both qualifications. One Wednesday afternoon, as I was gathering picture books, a librarian named Connie said, "You're really good with them. Ever consider part-time work?" I hadn't. But something in me stirred. Maybe it was Ellen's words. Maybe it was the quiet house. Maybe it was Matthew's squeal every time I did the pirate voice. I told her I'd think about it. Marissa surprised me again that spring. She asked if we could take a weekend trip, just the 3 of us. Not far, just to Hocking Hills. A cabin, a fire pit, and no Wi-Fi. "I think Matthew needs to see trees," she laughed. "Real trees, not cartoons." So we packed up the car, drove 2 hours southeast, and spent 2 nights in a tiny wooden cabin where the stars looked like glitter spilled across a velvet sky. Matthew threw pebbles into a stream for an hour straight. Marissa roasted marshmallows with surgical precision. And I, for the first time since Ellen's passing, slept without dreams. On the last night, we sat around the fire. Matthew was asleep in a bundle of blankets. The crackle of the wood filled the quiet. "I think I'm finally okay," Marissa whispered. I didn't say anything, just nodded. Because I believed her. And because I knew she didn't need permission to move on. She had already done it. Step by step. Name by name. Choice by choice. As we drove home the next morning, the radio low and the sun behind us, I looked in the rearview mirror. Matthew's head bobbed slightly with the motion. And I realized I didn't feel like a guard anymore. I felt like a grandfather. When we pulled into the driveway, Marissa turned to me and said, "Thank you for all of it." I smiled. "You don't owe me thanks. Just pass it forward." That night before bed, I picked up Ellen's letter once more. Read the last line aloud to myself. If it ever gets quiet again, don't waste it. And for once, I didn't feel guilty for the silence. I was grateful for it. The final document came in the mail with no fanfare. Just a plain manila envelope. Inside, a 2-page letter from the trust administrator officially confirming the transition. Matthew's share was fully protected. The escrow account was locked until he turned 25. And Derek's name no longer appeared on a single line. I held the papers in my hand for a while. There wasn't a rush of joy. No desire to celebrate. Just a calmness that came with knowing the last thread was finally severed. The damage Derek caused, emotional, financial, generational, had ended with him. That was Ellen's goal from the beginning. Later that evening, Marissa sat beside me at the kitchen table. We'd just finished putting Matthew to bed, and the house smelled faintly of cinnamon. She'd started baking again. "I talked to a lawyer downtown," she said, "just to make sure everything stays clean moving forward." I nodded. She was always 3 steps ahead now. "I also updated my own will," she added almost casually. That caught me off guard. "You're 34, I said. She smirked. "You never know. And I want to make sure Matthew doesn't inherit a mess." That was new. Not just protecting herself, but building for the future. We didn't speak about Derek much after that. There was no need. His absence had become a silent kind of peace. Not a vacuum, but a cleared space. In mid-November, the 3 of us drove out to the cemetery. Ellen had been gone 6 years. We brought chrysanthemums, the deep orange kind she used to plant in the fall. Matthew helped place the flowers, asking, "Did Grandma like orange?" "She loved it," I said. Then he sat beside the headstone and hummed to himself, tapping a pine cone against his knee. On the drive home, Marissa turned to me. "You know, I used to think the worst thing you could do to someone was cut them off." I glanced at her. "But now I think, sometimes that's the kindest thing you can do. For yourself, for your kid." I didn't respond. She didn't need me to. Thanksgiving was quiet that year. Just us and one neighbor couple Marissa had gotten to know through daycare. I roasted the turkey. Matthew made place cards. Marissa lit candles in Ellen's old holders. It was the first holiday where I didn't feel like something or someone was missing. Around Christmas, I accepted the part-time job at the library. It paid modestly, but that wasn't the point. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning I shelved books, led story hour, and helped with library cards. I learned how to use the checkout scanner. I learned that kids don't care if you mess up their names as long as you say them with a smile. And I learned that I still had something left to offer. Marissa kept thriving. She started dating someone new, a school administrator named James. She didn't introduce him right away, and I didn't pry. But when she eventually brought him by, I noticed something. He listened. Really listened. He didn't dominate the conversation. He didn't interrupt. He didn't shrink when she talked about hard years. And Matthew liked him. That was enough for me. By February of the next year, she had given him a key to the house. But she told me something I'll never forget. If he ever makes me feel small, I won't wait 10 years to say something. I smiled. She wouldn't have to. She was someone else now. As for me, retirement didn't mean irrelevance. It meant freedom. Freedom to choose what mattered. To leave behind what didn't. To define legacy not as money or property, but as space. Room for others to be safe. Room for the people I love to grow. One late March afternoon, Marissa came home with a small box. She slid it across the table toward me. Inside was a new plaque for the front door. The Harris Home, Est, 2024. I raised an eyebrow. She grinned. I changed it legally. Harris is who raised me, not just in name. I didn't cry, but I did step outside for air. The sky was pale blue. The wind was soft, and I swear I could hear Ellen's laughter in it. There was no announcement. No dramatic confrontation. No courtroom shouting. Just quiet steps taken with clarity. Quiet inheritance. Of values, of strength, of peace. And for the first time, I truly believed that was enough. More than enough. There's a particular kind of silence that doesn't ache, it heals. That's what I felt months after everything settled. Not the empty, echoing kind of silence that follows loss, but a stillness that made space, for laughter, for breath, for beginnings. I used to believe that justice had to be loud, that to truly reclaim what was lost, someone had to be exposed, shamed, dragged into the light. But the older I get, the more I understand. Sometimes the most powerful justice happens without a word. No revenge, no spotlight, just quiet removal, boundaries drawn, control reclaimed. And slowly, the life that was taken from you begins to regrow. I watched my daughter build a home out of ashes. I watched my grandson bloom in peace. And I too found something I thought was gone myself. We didn't win with noise. We won with patience, with documentation, with silence that said you don't belong here anymore. That kind of quiet is louder than any confrontation. If you've ever had to rebuild from someone else's wreckage, if you've chosen dignity over drama, protection over pride, then maybe you understand what we did, and maybe you've done it too. Let me know in the comments. What kind of justice speaks loudest to you?